Yes, sir, Bill said. The Lord sure been good to you, Sam. He rocked slowly in one of Sam's handmade chairs, looking out over the west field, which was greening up for a good harvest. Mm-hmm, Bert agreed. The three of them were on the porch of Sam's house. Bill and Bert had come to see him. He hadn't been to church in more than half a year. Sam didn't respond. He just sipped his gin and stared across the west field, too. A long minute went by. Beautiful home, beautiful farm, family. You got a lot to be grateful for, Bill said. Mm-hmm. Bert must have just come for support. Sam took another sip before he answered. How you figure? Bill cocked his head and looked at him. Just look around, brother. You're a blessed man. Sam nodded. I am a blessed man. I ain't disputing that. I'm disputing who did the blessing. Bill raised one eyebrow. Ain't but one place where blessings come from. From above. Bert finished the thought for him. So that field there, Sam nodded toward the crop they had all been staring at, that God's doing? 'Cause I remember a lot of hours chopping brush and digging stumps, and then more hours tilling and planting. There were days when it felt like that blessing nearly killed me. Well, sure, you put in some work, Bill said. But God gave you the earth to plant in, the right amount of sun to warm the seed, and the right amount of water to make it sprout. That'd be just a barren field without those things. Bert was nodding. Earth, sun, and rain, them's all God. Sam chuckled. He wasn't convinced. Bill, that tangled patch of briars across the road got the same sun and rain my field got. Hell, every saloon, church, and whorehouse in the county got those things. And every one of them sitting on this same earth, too. The only difference is what I did with it. Bert glanced nervously back and forth between Bill and Sam, his eyes bulging. Bill was shaking his head. You shouldn't talk like that, Brother Sam. You tell me which part ain't true, and I'll happily take it back, Sam replied. Bill's mouth hung open for a second. It's easy to take all the credit when things are going well, but what you gonna do when the weevil comes? Bert began to nod slowly. Pray, then you'll think of God. I'll do what I did the last time. I'll spray and do my best to fight 'em off, and then likely tighten my belt till the next year. Weevil's just a bug, and a bug's gotta eat same as us. And when there's enough of 'em, they win. Just a kind of natural arithmetic, just as natural as that sun, rain, and earth. Sam shook his head now. Maybe if you tried spraying instead of praying, Bill, you could have kept your farm. Why, you... Bill's jaws and lips still worked, but no more words came. Finally, he clamped his mouth shut and turned back toward the field, red-faced and breathing deeply. Bert turned back to the field, too, but he occasionally stole a sideways glance at Bill. After an awkward couple of minutes passed, Sam said, Look, Bill, I didn't mean to offend you. I'm just saying, why do mental and semantic somersaults to include God in something when there's a perfectly good natural explanation that fits? That never made sense to me. That's bad thinking, and bad thinking leads to bad decisions. And why is it that we only play those mind games for certain things, like when we achieve something or we get something good? He paused for a moment. Or when something happens beyond our control. Bert looked at Bill, waiting for the answer, but Bill still wasn't talking. So Bert spoke up. God's in everything, Sam, and everything's in God. Everything, huh? Sam said. Bert nodded. So when a few leaves blow across the road, do you take time to thank God then? Sam asked. Why would I? Bert responded. What about when you put the tea kettle on and the water gets hot? Do you give God credit for that? Right now, Bert, Sam pointed, on the back of your hand a mosquito is having his supper. Bert swatted quickly with the other hand, making a bloody mess. Bert, you just killed that mosquito without praying. What if God sent that mosquito to punish you for something? Bert began to laugh. God don't care about no mosquito or leaves blowing. And the kettle gets hot 'cause I lit the fire. Sam, you don't make no sense. Sam began to laugh with him. You're right, Bert. That makes no sense at all. But now we're back to my question. Why do we rush to include God in some things but not others? You said God's in everything. But if he's involved in leaves or mosquitoes or tea kettles, you don't think it's important enough to consider. But if that tea kettle was made of gold, suddenly you'd have to thank God for it. Or if that mosquito gave you yellow fever, then you'd go to praying. Bert stared at Sam for a second and then looked thoughtfully toward the setting sun. I never thought of it that way. Bill's eyes darted from Bert to Sam. Now don't you go getting Bert all confused, he snapped. The Bible says we should always give thanks to the one from whom all blessings flow. Sam leaned his head to one side and looked back at Bill. So if it's written in a book, that makes it true? Bill stared back without blinking. It's not just some book, Sam, it's the Bible. Sam nodded. Oh, I see. If it's written in an old book, that makes it true. If the book's written by God, Sam, Bert responded, God's book is true. How do we know if it's God's book? It says so, Bert said. Again, Sam nodded. So we know it's God's book because the book says it's God's book. And we know the book is true because the book says that it's true. Yep, Bert said. Sam began to laugh. I don't see what's so funny. Bert's face began to redden. It's not funny, Bill said, at all. Sam worked to regain his composure. Okay, Bert. What if I told you I had a dragon in my pocket? I'd say you was lying, Bert said. How could you tell? Sam asked. 'Cause dragons ain't real, and if they was, they couldn't fit in no pocket. Bill was shaking his head. This is ridiculous. But Sam continued. But what if I told you I was telling you the truth, Bert? Bert snorted. I still wouldn't believe you had a dragon in your pocket. You was the one telling the crazy story in the first place. You saying it was the truth wouldn't make no... Bert stopped abruptly and his eyes widened. Oh, Sam smiled. See, when a book tells you crazy stories, it don't mean a damn thing if the same book insists that they're all true. Bert slumped back into his chair, silent and staring at the ground. About most things, when we hear something unlikely, we know to look for other sources to back it up before we buy into it. Even the Bible itself says to look for 2 or 3 witnesses. Sam leaned back. But when it comes to the Bible, we turn off our thinking and expect the world around us to pretend we're still making sense. Bill sat up suddenly. Miracles! What about them? Sam asked. Yeah, Bill, what about them? They answer everything you've been saying. Bill was smiling now. You may explain ordinary day-to-day stuff like your crops growing or the leaves blowing, but you can't explain healings or when God sends a special blessing in a time of need. Bert sighed in relief. That's true, Sam. God healed my mama and she hasn't had to take her pills for 2 months. And miracles provide another witness to prove the Bible's true. Bill raised his eyebrows and continued to smile. Well... Sam raised his eyebrows and smiled back. I guess that all makes sense. Bill and Bert nodded with satisfaction, and Bill sat back, returning his gaze once again to the field. The reds and pinks of the sunset now played on the edges of the leaves. Bill started gently rocking once more. If, Sam said. Bill stopped rocking, and both he and Bert looked over at Sam. What do you mean, if? He said. Miracles would prove the supernatural and would at least back up some of the Bible if, he paused for effect, if they were really miracles. God healed my mama, Bert said. She's walking around proving it every day. We'll come back to your mama in a minute, Sam replied. Remember what I said earlier about how we only want to get God involved in some things, but for some reason leave him out of others? We do the same thing with miracles. Tell me, what is a miracle? Something really rare that happens, Bert said. So winning the lottery? Sam asked. Yep, Bert said. No, Bill rolled his eyes. Something that goes against the laws of nature but happens anyway. Okay, Bill. Sam fixed him with a steady gaze. So if you're walking through the woods and you come across a tree with bark like a birch but needles like a pine, that's rare, and it seems to go against the laws of nature. Do you immediately think miracle? Yes, maybe. I don't know. Bill's jaw began to work. Or do you think, is this a new kind of tree? Or a better question, is this a kind of tree new to me? 'Cause honestly, Bill, you probably don't have all the laws of nature memorized. And there's a lot of other questions you'd probably ask before you jump to thinking it was a miracle. Is this some sort of strange cross-pollination? Is the bark diseased? Are the leaves diseased? Did some animal rub the bark smooth? You know why you'd ask these questions before you go claiming a miracle? Because when it comes to random trees and 99% of everything else, you know instinctively to look for a natural explanation before assuming it's supernatural. What about my mama? Bert insisted. Sam turned from Bill to him. Which is more likely, Bert, that the doctor was just wrong to begin with, or that an invisible man waved his invisible hand and made her better? Doctors are people, Bert. People get stuff wrong all the time. Maybe what your mama had was something that just naturally got better, instead of the thing the doctor said. Or worse. What do you mean, worse? Bert looked anxious. What's more likely, Sam continued, that an invisible man healed her, or that the problem the doctor found can take a few weeks or months to kill her? No! Bert buried his face in his hands and began to cry. You're a horrible person, Bill said. Maybe, Sam said, but rather than assuming all is fine, he needs to take her to get a second opinion. And my point is this: which is more likely when we encounter something we can't explain? That it's a miracle, something supernatural, or that we just don't know the answer yet? That there's some natural explanation we haven't yet discovered? For almost everything, we know the second one is more likely. But for a few things, once again, we turn off our thinking and insist on giving God credit.